So we have an update when it comes to the ratings for this week's episode of Impact Wrestling on AXS TV. Now, we spoke about it before here on the channel that I felt that the ratings for this week's episode of Impact Wrestling arguably would be far more interesting than last week's. Of course, last week when it came to Kenny Omega's first ever appearance on Impact Wrestling, coming out of him winning the AEW World Championship, of course the ratings were going to be really high and we were going to see record numbers on AXS TV and on Twitch and on social media, and that's exactly what we saw. But it was going to be far more interesting what we saw this week after last week's episode of Impact and Final Resolution. What were we going to see with Kenny Omega's third appearance on Impact, or as part of the Impact Wrestling umbrella? What were the ratings going to come out as? What were the Twitch numbers going to come out as? And it's been quite interesting because Impact Wrestling has suffered a big drop in viewership on AXS TV and Twitch from last week's episode. Now, Tuesday's new edition of Impact Wrestling drew 177,000 live viewers on AXS TV. This is according to Showbuzz Daily. The show drew a 0.04 rating in the key 18 to 49 demographic. This week's episode of Impact on AXS TV ranks number 143 for the nights in the cable top 150 and 134 for the night in the viewership. Now, these numbers are quite substantially down from last week's episode of Impact on AXS TV, which of course drew 221,000 live viewers. So we're down roughly about 20% from last week's number, and last week's number actually also had a 0.08 rating in the key demographic. That's down about 50% from last week's number. So as I mentioned, this week we got a 0.04 and last week we had a 0.08. So we're down significantly in the key metrics, the total viewerships and the key demographic. Of course, last week's episode also ranked number 96 for the night in the cable top 150 and 123 in viewership as well. But that's not the only story there, because you could argue, well, of course, when it comes to AXS TV, the distribution is limited. Some people don't have AXS TV on cable or around the world, whatever. The big number is on Twitch. Well, Impact Wrestling also suffered a big drop in their viewership on Twitch as well. Now, the show peaked on Tuesday at 14,663 viewers, which is down a massive 72% from the peak last week, which was 52,492 viewers. So we're down over 70% on Twitch, which is incredibly significant. The average viewership this week on Twitch was 12,397 viewers, which is down once again 71.3% from last week's. Now, it should be noted that this week's viewership was still better than what the show would usually be doing on the platform if it was prior to last week, outside of last week's gargantuan numbers. So Impact isn't going to be massively, it's not the end of the world, put it that way. We're still doing better numbers if you're an Impact Wrestling executive than they were doing previously. Of course, this week's episode of Impact Wrestling on AXS TV once again featured appearances from AEW President Tony Khan, AEW announcer Tony Schiavone. Also featured an appearance by AEW World Champion Kenny Omega with Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President Don Callis. We got the main event for Hard to Kill announced, which is AEW World Champion Kenny Omega reuniting the Bullet Club with Doc Gallows and Carl Anderson to go against the Impact World Champion Rich Swann and the Motor City Machine Gun. So we got significant news, but the ratings were not fantastic if you compare them to last week. But what I do want to point out here, and I don't mean this to be, I'm just defending Impact, because I'm not. I'm trying to delve into what the real story here is and what do the numbers tell us. And the issue is, when it comes to ratings, they can be, and numbers in general, they can be manipulated to tell whatever narrative you would like. But the rating from this week, the 177,000 live viewers that tuned in, that's pretty much pre-pandemic numbers still. You have to look at the numbers prior to the pandemic truly hitting in around March of earlier this year. And for instance, I've got some of the ratings up in front of me right now. February 25 did 195,000. February 18 did 186,000. February 11 did 176,000. February 4 did 174,000. January 28 did 188. January 21 did 150. January 7, the first episode of 2020, did actually 200,000 live viewers. So if you look at the number that they got on Tuesday, it's pretty much to where they were prior to the pandemic. That is significant in itself, because we know in general television ratings are going down in 2020. That's not just for pro wrestling, that's for everything across the board. people just aren't interested in watching TV. They're more focused on cable news or news in general. The world's going crazy, so people are tending to watch the news, or just in general, people aren't watching TV as they previously would have because cable's too expensive, or they're cutting the cord when it comes to cable because financially they can't afford it, or there are other means as to watching television, whether it's online through streaming and stuff like that. So that's something to consider there as well. But they're pretty much doing pre-pandemic numbers with the episode on Tuesday, which I think they'll be satisfied with. Is it disappointing for Impact? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know their expectations there. For me, the ratings going down from last week, it's not overly surprising. It's not overly surprising because if you go back and watch the videos that I've done talking about what we could expect to see in terms of viewership, for this week's episode, I said that, to be honest, whenever you get these big ratings, whenever you get a big rating for whatever reason, it's a big show, the following week, very rarely do you improve on that number. Very rarely. There's always a drop-off. Now, I felt that given that they had once again hyped up, well, not hyped up, but they had announced that we were going to have some AEW-centric content on there, from Kenny Omega specifically, but also we were going to have Tony Khan and Tony Schiavone on there again. That wasn't announced, but the very fact that Kenny Omega was announced to be returning to Impact Wrestling, I felt that the drop-off wouldn't be as much as it was. So what was it, about 20%? It's the key demographic numbers that I think hurt, and obviously the Twitch numbers dropping about 70%. That's incredibly significant. That's incredibly significant. What story does that tell? Does that show you the success, the huge success of last week, or the disappointment of this week? I'm not sure. It's probably somewhere in between when it comes to that. Like I said before, it's not necessarily a bad rating. Excluding last week, if we take last week out of the equation, it's the best number that Impact have done since September 22nd, which was 200,000. And it certainly is above the average that Impact Wrestling have been doing for the entirety of the pandemic. So the numbers that they've been doing during the pandemic this year, like I said, in television in general, have been down. So it's above their average during the pandemic. It's the best number excluding last week since September 22nd. So there are positives to take from this. And it's what I said previously. I said that the interesting numbers necessarily wouldn't be last week. It would be this week and the week after and the week after that. It'd be the following weeks because you'd want to see if that number, the 221,000 live viewers from last week, if that was truly sustainable. Now, at the moment, we don't know. It's one week from the other, and we got a big announcement on Impact Wrestling this week when it comes to the Hard to Kill main event. As soon as we get closer to that, especially in the new year, obviously ratings will fluctuate and change. So I did expect some drop-off, maybe not that much in terms of the ratings on AXS TV, especially on Twitch. That is the shocking element there. Going down about 70%, that is very surprising. As I mentioned at the start, it's still better than what they were previously doing on Twitch. I think the issue probably there is that they did such a high figure last week on Twitch for them that there was always going to be drop-off and it was always going to look quite extreme. Nevertheless, I don't know if they would have truly expected a drop-off of 70%. Now, what you do have to discuss about that drop-off is, did Impact achieve the goal that they would have liked there? I mentioned before when it came to that episode last week with Kenny Omega on Impact Wrestling on AXS TV that Impact Wrestling's objective in that episode should have been, people are coming to watch the AEW content, we have to make them stay and stay going forward for the Impact Wrestling content. Did the viewers truly stay for Impact when they came for AEW? To put it bluntly, obviously the answer is no, because they didn't stay around this week. So I think that's a point of contention probably for Impact that they have to think about going forward. Does this reflect on the show and the product that we're offering? Does this reflect on our ability to hook viewers in once they've sampled our product? I've used the restaurant analogy before. You can have a huge, grand restaurant opening. You can have people flying through the doors, but if you serve them a subpar product, they won't return. It was the same last week. People were flooding through the doors because of this AEW promotion, but Impact still had to give them a product that was worth returning for. Now, the viewers haven't returned this week. What does that say about the product? There obviously might have to be some discussions about, okay, where did it go right, where did it go wrong when it comes to the difference between last week and this week, when it comes to promotion, hype, the matches, the hooks, the storylines that aren't focused on AEW. Where did that go right and where did that go wrong? I think they need to have that discussion. And obviously, when it comes to ratings, and of course this week there's been a lot of discussion about ratings in pro wrestling, especially with Monday Night Raw doing their all-time record low ratings that they've ever done. There is this discussion about ratings. are ratings still important? And it will be my same answer that I said for Monday Night Raw. We did a video on it, go check that out. It'll be the same answer here. Ratings in 2020, they are important. They are important. And I think ratings will always be important because when it comes to television contracts are what drive pro wrestling at this point. Television contracts is what made AEW profitable in its first year as a company. Outside the realm of pro wrestling, just in general in business, that's incredibly impressive. That's because of TV. Television is what's made WWE so much money over the last few years, whether it's re-signing with NBC Universal for Raw on the USA Network or that $1 billion contract they got for SmackDown on Fox. So television ratings are incredibly important because they matter to those people that hand out those contracts. They matter to the television networks and they matter to the people that advertise on the program. So they are important, but they're not as important as they were in the 1990s, say in the Monday Night Wars, for telling the entire picture, telling the entire story. Content is consumed so differently in 2020 to how it was 20 years ago. Yes, you have live viewership, which we're looking at right now, but you also have on-demand, DVR, social media, highlights on YouTube, highlights on Twitter and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. You also have illegal streaming as well. All of that plays a part into how people consume content in 2020. Are ratings still important? Absolutely. Do they tell the entire story? Absolutely not. But when you do have that argument that content is consumed differently in 2020, I mentioned there about social media and streaming and Twitch. Twitch, for me, as I mentioned, that's the big surprising factor of this. The fact that the numbers have gone down, that's not massively surprising. If anything, it might have been expected, considering the numbers that they did last week. The Twitch streams and the Twitch peak streams being down about 70%, that is surprising. Yes, it is above what they were usually doing, but nevertheless it is surprising. Now, I don't think the whole episode, you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, I don't think the whole episode this time was put on YouTube or Facebook. Might be wrong in that case, I don't know. I suppose an interesting factor is here. Now, we spoke about screeners before, the issue when it came to the screeners last week. Of course, Impact Wrestling and AXS TV sent out a full episode of Impact Wrestling last week with the first appearance by Kenny Omega out to several journalists with an embargo. Once the show's over, write about it, get it up, get your articles ready so you can publish them the moment Impact goes off the air. People can read about it, there'll be buzz about Impact. It's a win-win for both parties. Now, of course, several websites broke that embargo last week, which got a lot of people upset, yours included. I was very upset by this. And this week, Impact Wrestling and AXS TV didn't send out those screeners. Now, you could argue, I suppose, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with this, but it's certainly an argument to be made, that because those spoilers weren't posted online, maybe there wasn't the buzz that there was last week because people didn't know what to expect or a reason to tune in for. Maybe that's a thing there. Maybe that's a thing there. Now, I know some people, as I mentioned, might say, well, the accessibility to get to AXS TV, the availability of AXS TV, that's an issue. That might be why the ratings went down. But ultimately, that's what Twitch is for. And I think the most alarming statistic, as I mentioned, isn't necessarily the AXS TV number, but it's the Twitch number. And possibly an issue was for last week is that going off the air for Impact Wrestling last week, did we get any real cliffhanger or did we get any real indication as to the direction of Kenny Omega and Don Callis when it came to Impact Wrestling? We didn't really. We didn't get any reason to watch Impact Wrestling the following week. There was no real reaching out to the viewers and saying, you have to tune in next week because we're going to do this, because we're going to do that. They didn't do that. And on the following night on AEW Dynamite, once again, it was kind of the same promo that they did on Impact. And again, that got criticised because it didn't drive people to go watch Impact. And I think maybe that's the problem there. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe possibly the fact that Kenny Omega's second and third Impact Wrestling appearances weren't promoted by AEW or it wasn't announced on AEW Dynamite. Maybe that's an issue there. Because they didn't announce on Dynamite last week, Kenny Omega's going to be at Final Resolution on Saturday, and they didn't mention that Kenny Omega once again would be at Impact Wrestling on Tuesday. That was announced over the weekend by Impact Wrestling on their Twitter account. Yes, it was heavily promoted on social media, and I know that Impact does have a lot of followers on Twitter, and it was actually a bit of a point of contention between some Impact and AEW fans that, wow, you know, Impact Wrestling, they actually have more Twitter followers than AEW. I don't know how many, you know, are actually real, quite frankly, and how many people are actually active followers of Impact Wrestling. You could have a lot of accounts there that no longer are functioning or, quite frankly, aren't real. I mean, that's just how social media works. Don't believe everything you see or read, folks. So, again, in terms of engagement, Is that there? I don't know. Bluntly, if you want to get down to the nuts and bolts of it, maybe the viewers just didn't like what they saw. Now, I did see some people, not everyone, I think most of the people on my timeline at least, maybe that's because I'm skewed towards Impact at this point, but a lot of people on my timeline were very happy and content and excited about what last week's episode did offer. But last week's episode, I did see some people on my timeline, some prominent people in the pro wrestling journalism business. I won't name names, that's not fair, but I did see some people that had tuned into Impact last Tuesday for the first time in a long time, or for the first time ever, and they said that they found the show boring, or they said that they found that it lacked a bit of direction. Now, obviously, I disagree. Obviously, I disagree with that point of view, but maybe that is representative of a few people that did tune into Impact on AXS TV for the first time last week, and they didn't like what they saw. Obviously, because the ratings went down on AXS TV and on Twitch this week. Now, there's lots of different ways you can dissect this. Is the fact that you had all these people tune in for the first time or return to Impact for the first time in a long time, and they saw the empty arena, the empty Impact zone. Is that a problem? Because, of course, if they're watching WWE or AEW or NXT regularly at the moment, that's not the case. WWE, they have the Thunderdome, they have the piped-in sound into the arena, they have the virtual fans. AEW does have actually live fans in attendance and wrestlers surrounding the ring. NXT has a hybrid of both. So maybe tuning into Impact and once again being back to what they were watching when it comes to WWE and AEW, as it were, back in April and May with the empty arenas, maybe that was a bit of, wow, I'm really not digging this. That was a problem watching WWE back in April and May because those empty arena shows at the Performance Center were tough to watch. Maybe they tuned into Impact and they felt the same thing. In addition to that, of course, we know the situation when it comes to Impact Wrestling's taping schedule. It is a tape show. Everything is post-produced and edited in. It doesn't have that live raw feel, and I know Impact isn't often live, but even the atmosphere of the crowd in the small space, it doesn't have that feeling. Maybe that's an issue when people tuned in as well. Maybe they just felt like, you know what, I'm just not feeling it. It's not hooking me in. And to be fair, December, the end of the year, it's a tough time for ratings, but a counter-argument to that is AEW is doing some of the best ratings they've done this year. SmackDown's been doing pretty much okay for the last few months because the content's been good as well. So I'm not really going to lean into that excuse. Yes, when it comes to pro wrestling and December ratings, usually they are down, but you've got other companies that are doing fine right now, so I don't know if necessarily that's the right option either. Personally, I just don't think this week's episode of Impact on AXS TV was heavily promoted as the week prior. I think that's fundamentally probably the biggest issue here. Therefore, the interest just quite frankly wasn't as high as it was the week prior, and maybe that's the issue here. Now, you would hope that next week's rating, especially on Twitch, but on AXS TV as well, might be higher, and the viewership might be higher because of the way Impact went off the air this week. Of course, we had the main event for Hard to Kill be announced. We had Kenny Omega physically get involved for the first time. We had Kenny Omega reunite with the Bullet Club, and they're going to be feuding now with Rich Swann, the Impact World Champion, and the Motor City Machine Guns. That's a very big angle. That was very newsworthy. That got a lot of buzz the following day on social media. And maybe the fact that that angle happened, there is buzz again, there's a bit of hype. People now know to expect to see Kenny Omega on Tuesdays. Maybe the ratings might be higher next week because it's already got more hype since the match that was announced for Hard to Kill. But an issue there, I suppose, is next Tuesday, of course, is 3 days before Christmas. People will be busy, even though they're spending most of the holidays at home this year for obvious reasons. There'll be a festive spirit, or people will be spending time with their family, and Impact Wrestling, and quite frankly wrestling, or just maybe even TV in general, won't be their priority at that period of time. It'll be about the holidays and spending time with their family. Hence what I mentioned, ratings are usually down in December. Now I would expect them to respond or maybe bounce back, but I could also see, and I wouldn't quite frankly be super surprised if they dipped even more next week, because that's pro wrestling in the holiday season. So it still could ultimately go down. I think next week will be interesting, and to be honest, in all likeliness, it probably will go down due to the schedule and due to the time of year. But a positive for Impact Wrestling is, like I said, they're still doing pre-pandemic numbers. They're still doing better on Twitch than they were previously, so it's not all doom and gloom. And I think in January, as we go into the new year and we get closer to Hard to Kill and Genesis, I expect to see the next spike in terms of the ratings on AXS TV and Twitch going forward. So obviously, we're going to be in a completely different scenario this year, of course. Next year, of course. This year is such a fluke year and a strange year, so I expect Impact to rebound at some point. Maybe not next week, but as we get into January, I think we can possibly see some more positivity and some more upward trajectory, easy for me to say, when it comes to the ratings. So I think maybe that's where we're looking at, but it certainly is interesting, and always when you look at ratings, it's always interesting, especially when it looks at this AEW and Impact Wrestling crossover. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on the ratings from Impact Wrestling's episode on AXS TV this week, going down significantly on AXS TV and Twitch? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, all things pro wrestling. Get involved in the community in the comment section. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button. It really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.